Hey everybody, Ron Bielefeld, Whistling Wings Photography. Welcome to another video. I've got an R3. Yep, an R3. And I'm going to keep it. Now, I'm a bird photographer, primarily, and 24 megapixels on the R3, 45 megapixels on the R5. I love the 45 megapixels for birds. My thinking was the R3, 24 megapixels, not enough. But shooting the camera changed my mind. I'm going to keep it. And if you want to know why, stay tuned. Okay, here we are. Canon R3, Canon R5. We're going to talk about the Canon R3 and why, as a bird photographer, I'm going to keep it anyway, even though it's only 24 megapixels. I know a lot of wildlife photographers and a lot of bird photographers that are thinking, I'm not going to get the R3 because it's only 24 megapixels. It's not enough. We as bird photographers like to crop things a lot. Some just have to. Birds are small, can't get close to the birds, so having the resolution is nice. But I'm going to talk about, in this video, I'm not going to talk about the whole camera, I'm not going to go over setups, I'm going to talk about my initial thoughts for shooting this camera for just a week, how it convinced me to keep it, and I'm going to talk about the aspects of this camera that basically brought me to that conclusion. The main reason, the ultimate reason, is because it will get me more of the shots I'm trying to get more often than the Canon R5 will. I'm not getting rid of my Canon R5. It's going to have its place along with the R3 when I need the resolution, but the R3 brings back some things and refines a lot of stuff from where it's at with the R5. Got my notes here. I don't use a lot of notes when I do my videos, but I'm going to use them here because I don't want to miss anything. The first improvement of the R3 over the R5. The R5 has an idiosyncrasy that I don't like for my bird photography, and that's when the EVF turns off, then you bring your camera back to your eye and the EVF turns back on, but it takes too long. Yes, I know you can half press on the way up and it will turn back on the way up, and by the time you get it to your eye it'll be on, but that's another thing that you have to do. And when I'm shooting birds in flight, things that are happening very, very quickly, action type stuff, that's another thing I don't want to have to do. The Canon R3 improves upon that greatly. It is almost instantaneous when you bring it to your eye. I love that aspect of the R3. That's really the first improvement that makes it easier to get more shots with the R3 than the R5. Second, the buffer on the R3 versus the R5. 24 megapixels, 45 megapixels, moving a lot more data than here, but shooting 30 frames per second here, 20 here. If you're using electronic shutter, the buffer lasts longer on the R3. It doesn't go and hit the buffer wall so quickly, even shooting 30 frames per second. You tone it down. Now you can tone the electronic shutter down on this, frames per second down on this now. When you're shooting electronic shutter, down to 15 or even to 3. You shoot 15 frames per second, you barely hit a buffer. You can shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot, just like I used to be able to do with my 1DX2, even on 30 frames per second versus 20 here, it lasts longer. Hitting the buffer wall is a problem. I shoot a lot of situations where I'm holding that button down because stuff is continuing to happen in front of me. And with the R5, I'm finding that I have to pulse my shooting so I don't hit that buffer wall at a critical point. I don't have to worry about, I'm missing some shots because of it. Because when I'm pulling up is when it happens, and then the R3, I don't have to meter my shooting. I don't have to think about that. That's better. It gets me more shots. I love that about the R3. It also, buffer related again, it also if you do hit the buffer wall and you're shooting to the Compact Flash Express card especially, it dumps the buffer really, really fast compared to the R5. So you get back to shooting full frames per second much quicker. That's another buffer related thing, but it's really important. It gets me more shots. 30 frames per second, R3, 20 frames per second, R5. People say, heard it all the time, if you can't get the shot you want with 10 frames per second, 12 frames per second, now 20 frames per second with the R5 up through the years, right as we were getting faster with frames per second, it was the same story. If you can't get it with what's happening now, you're not going to get that shot anyway. That is absolutely wrong. It's wrong. Because the faster frames per second you shoot when you're shooting action, it ups the probability of getting the exact shot you're looking for. The wings on birds in flight in the right position, the bird glancing at you, the beak just touching the water on a diving kingfisher. The more frames per second you have, the more probability you're going to get the exact shot you want. 30 frames per second versus 20. In certain circumstances, like when I shoot the kingfisher all the time in the wintertime, 30 frames per second, please. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. 30 frames per second on the R3 gets me more shots. Frames per second. Rolling shutter. R5, yes, it has rolling shutter. And I'm not talking about just in the background. And I know I said in my other videos that the R5 didn't have rolling shutter. It doesn't when you're panning with a bird. It's not on the bird. It was on the backgrounds and things, and it didn't really matter for me. Vertical elements being tilted, yes, on the R5, but there's a little bit of a problem with rolling shutter as well on the R5 if you have a bird's wings moving very quickly through the frame. You get some horizontal banding in the wingtips, and that's a bother. It's not a real big issue, but it's a bother. Guess what? R3, faster readout speeds coming off the sensor, the data, eliminates all of that. No background rolling shutter, no horizontal banding in kingfisher wingtips. Seems to really be prevalent in kingfishers for some reason. Don't know why, but it is. And I'll show you some pictures of that, and I'll prove it to you, okay? So anyway, no rolling shutter to speak of, the R3 at all. That's going to affect what I do with my bird photography. Gets me more pictures that I can keep, the R3. EVF lag, the electronic viewfinder lag. Again, I said there was really no lag in the R5 in previous videos. There really isn't. There's always lag, yes, I know. I'm not talking about electronics. I'm not talking about electrical engineering here about lag. Yes, it exists. I'm talking about real lag that affects my ability to pan with a bird, pan with fast action, and not fall behind because of the lag of the update of the viewfinder. The R5's is really, really good. Guess what? The R3 is even better. It's just one of those things that's hard to explain. You can do it with the R5. It's really not a problem. But you pick up the R3 and you start shooting it, and it's just like, it's just a little bit better. It's just better. No lag in there that keeps me at all. It's just beautiful to shoot. The viewfinder itself is gorgeous. I love it. I love shooting action with the R3. It's still really, really good with the R5, but the R3 may get me a little bit more good shots if action is really, really fast. R3, just a bit of a refinement. It's better. Lastly, the autofocus in general on the R3 and the R5. The R5, when it first came out, I said paradigm shift, right? Just unbelievably good. Zone, eye detect with tracking especially. The R3 just takes it another step up. We've got it leveled up again, more refined. The eye detect is stickier than it is on the R5 even. Now I did the firmware update on the R5, the 1.5.0. I haven't tried it since then because I've been concentrating on working with the R3. Maybe it's even better now. I don't know. But all I can say is the R3 is great. It is amazing. The zone now, all these little changes you can actually in the zones, they added a zone, a full frame zone now for a main autofocus method, and you can now have eye detect with tracking I call it like overlaid on the zones. You couldn't do that with the R5. It has it on the R3. The one setting, the one main autofocus method that I use a lot is spot, and now you can have tracking with spot. So I love it. When you have a bunch of birds out on the water, like ducks swimming around and their heads are all intermingling, you put the spot autofocus on the head you want, you hit your back autofocus button or half press, and it will basically then grab the eye and track it anywhere in the frame. But it gives you like a gun sight, a single spot to put on the bird you want amongst all those birds milling around, and it will grab the one you want every time and then track it from that point. That is so awesome. That is so awesome. Gets me more shots over this system, again, in certain scenarios. The next thing about the autofocus system here versus here, it doesn't seem to get stuck on backgrounds and stuff as much. If you miss getting the focus on your subject, on a bird per se, and then it grabs the background and you keep pumping your back button or half press or whatever you used to initiate autofocus, it just stays stuck there. It doesn't recycle. It doesn't cycle trying. You're telling it, try again. That's not the right thing. Try again. And it won't do it. The R3 does that more now, like the digital SLRs, like my 1DX2 used to do. Much better in that respect. The R5 got stuck a lot. A lot of mirrorless cameras get stuck on things that you don't want them to focus on, and then you can't get them to retry again. The R3 seems to be better at that. It's early on, but it seems to be better. That will get me more shots. So, as a bird photographer, 24 megapixels, not enough. Here's the thing about resolution. There's the real resolution, right? The actual resolution of the sensors. 45, 24. But then there's the realized, what you look at, what you see, what does it look like when you look at your images and you post-process them. The R3's resolution is more like 30 megapixels than 24. It's very, very similar to images that I was getting with my 5D Mark IV at 30 megapixels. The pixels are better though. They're nicer, they're sharper. It's just the quality, the overall quality of the pixels coming off of this camera make it seem more like it's a 30 megapixel camera. You can crop a little bit more and you're still getting the detail in the birds as if you were cropping a 30 megapixel image versus a 24 megapixel image. I still love the 24 or the 45 megapixels coming off all these numbers. I'm getting all anyway. The 45 megapixels, I love the resolution coming out of this camera. I do. And I wish the R3 was 45. Wait for the R1. It's going to be 45 megapixels, 50, 60. So they're not going to, Canon's not going to bring out another top tier camera, single digit, camera like the R3 and it be, again, 20 some megapixels. It's not going to happen. That's my view. It's going to be a higher megapixel camera, higher resolution, but it's going to have all of the components of the R3. It's going to be like shooting an R3 at 45, 50, 60, 70 megapixels. That will be the ultimate day for me as a bird photographer. But for right now, I'm going to be shooting an R3 alongside an R5. An R5 when I need the resolution, absolutely. Shooting very small birds or situations I can't get close to the birds. The R3 for when the critical action is happening and I need to get that action. The R3 will do that for me at 24 megapixels, realizing really almost 30, I think, in my brain when I'm post-processing my images. So that's it. It's going to be an R3 and an R5 for me doing my bird photography. I know a lot of wildlife photographers, like I said, and bird photographers are thinking about not getting the R3 because it's only 24 megapixels. I would suggest maybe you try it out. Like me, you might have your mind changed once you shoot this camera and look at the images coming out of it and you see the autofocus and all these other aspects that I'm talking about here today. You might change your mind. Now, that's being what it is. Everybody has different scenarios that they shoot most often, so it just may not work for everybody. But for me, pairing an R3 with an R5 is probably going to be the way to go. And we'll see. Now, I'm not going to cover in this video all of the setups that I've done in here and everything else about this camera. This was just to talk about my initial impressions of the R3 after shooting it for a week or so, and getting at the nitty-gritty of why I've already determined I'm going to keep this camera. And that's why I went over just the main things that really are important to me as a bird photographer, and the main things of the R3 that will get me more shots by shooting it over my R5. So, as always, be safe, have great light, take great images, and I'll see you next time.